In this video, we'll learn about projection masking and how we can use it to prevent unwanted paint effects like stretching. Okay, so I'm on the exact same layer here inside my asset, and I've shown this little pouch that our character has on her belt. So now when you think about painting here, we're not exactly painting on a 2D surface. We're painting on a three-dimensional surface. So with that comes some problems. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. I'm going to switch back to my default brush, and I know that was the last brush that I had selected for my paintbrush tool, so I can quickly do that by just tapping the N key on my keyboard. Doing that will switch my alpha back to the default brush, and I can see that over here inside my brush editor. Fantastic. So now I still have white selected, I believe, yes. And if I were to come in here, and let's say I was painting a detail kind of along the edge here of what our camera can see, and I came in and I just painted something sort of like that. And I bake that down. I might get a nasty surprise when I went to orbit the mesh. So you can see here that we have some pretty clear stretching effects that are happening. This texture actually stretched across the surface of the front side of this mesh, when really I was looking at it like so. So this is actually a pretty common problem, and it gets really, really bad in certain situations. And it's something that MARI has some safeguards built into to prevent from happening. So let me just undo back a few times until I haven't baked that down. And what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to come in here and turn on edge masking. Now this is probably turned on by default inside of your copy of MARI, and it's something I disabled just to sort of illustrate a point here. So you want to click on this little toggle switch right here until you see a green light come up next to it. Now what edge masking does is it prevents paint from stretching beyond a certain distance around the mesh, away from the camera. So it'll be easier for me to illustrate this if I come over here in my projection settings and enable this mask preview. So if I turn that on, you can see there are some areas that get highlighted in red. Now as I orbit around the mesh, that red highlighting changes. So everywhere that is red is being either partially or completely masked out by this edge masking. Now you'll notice that this color of red, let me just shrink my brush down so I can point with it. This color of red right here is not quite as bright or pronounced as the red right over here. This isn't either it's masked or it's not masked type of a situation. This is an area where there's a gradation happening. So there is a certain level of fall off that is allowed. So there's much more masking happening over here because that is pointing further away from the camera than, say, for example, here. So this is all something we can control inside of our edge masking. And if you come over here and just click on that, you can roll out those settings. And you can see here we have both a fall off start and a fall off end. And we can come in here and we can begin to tailor these to fit our situation. So if we wanted to dial this up, you can see it's getting much more red. And we could come in here and start to really tighten this up and make it a lot more strict. So you can see here now, I'm really only going to be able to paint in this one area where if that paint moves around those edges away from my camera at all, it's going to end up getting masked out. So what I would do with this is going to be something that you want to sort of tailor to the surface you're painting, and you just want to come in here and experiment with it a little bit. If you start to notice stretching, then you'll probably want to come in here and maybe make this a little bit more strict so that you don't end up getting that kind of texture stretching here. So I'll just come in here and paint a little bit more. We'll go ahead and bake that down. And let me just jump up here and disable my preview for the mask so we can kind of take a look at this. There we go. And you can see here how that's starting to feather off there instead of such a harsh stretching off and then cutting off as it got to sort of this indentation right here. So this is something that, again, like I said, is very important as you're working on painting a three-dimensional asset. And I typically just leave edge masking turned on, to be honest with you. Now, I do also have back face masking turned on, and this is one that's hard to visualize, especially for a mesh that is enclosed like this one is. These are all closed shapes. There's not any real back face showing. Well, except for right there. It looks like we've got a situation on kind of the belt loop for this pouch where there's a little bit of interpenetration of the two sides of the mesh. Looks like the artist got it just a little bit thin there in his high poly sculpting application, and so we've got a bit of interpenetration. So if you're working on a mesh that is not completely closed off, this is an important thing to keep on, because painting on the front faces in MARI is really no different than painting on the back faces. Without back face masking turned on, you could conceivably accidentally paint on the back faces of your model, and it would show up in your textures. So MARI is intelligent enough to know, though, what is the front side of a polygon and what is the back side. So again, this is just a good one to leave on. Now I'll go and turn it off so we can take a look at a few other ones here. Now, channel masking is an interesting option here. I'll go ahead and let MARI catch up to me. Channel masking allows me to take one of the channels in my project, for example, maybe this ambient occlusion channel, and I can use that as a mask. So let me just roll this out. I'll come in here and I'll select my ambient occlusion channel. And we still have our preview turned on, so let's go ahead and flip on the channel mask. And what we should see is a bit of red shows up based on the ambient occlusion channel and the pixel information that exists in that channel. So we'll go ahead and bump it around. There we go. So you can see that indeed most of the mesh is actually masked out, and that's entirely okay. What we could do is we could come down here if we wanted to and see that I've actually got that inverted. So yours may not have done that by default. Mine is actually inverted, so we can come in here and turn that off, and now you can see we're starting to get masking information where there is ambient occlusion. So this is a mask curve. We can start to increase the contrast of that if we wanted to. We could start to bring in a little bit more. We could start to tighten it up a little bit, maybe bring in a little bit less, depending on what you'd like to do. And you can even come in and add little points to this curve. If you really want to start to create your own custom curve here. Now, if at any time you want to reset these options back to their defaults, you can always click this little R button, and that works for the mask amount and the mask contrast as well here. You can see how we can start to really adjust these to fine-tune the masking based on this channel. All right, great. Let's go ahead and turn that off here. There's a couple more forms of projection masking that are located here inside this palette. There is, to be honest with you, this ambient occlusion mask right here. MARI has the ability to calculate its own ambient occlusion for the purpose of viewing it in MARI's canvas. I did not set this project up using that. Instead, I used one of the new Moto bakers that have been included with MARI, which we're going to learn about in an upcoming video, to actually bake out this ambient occlusion information here. So this is production quality ambient occlusion that is in the form of a channel, so it can be output and used in a render engine. So in the terms of the projection masking, because this project is set up that way, this ambient occlusion masking, I probably wouldn't use it. Just use the ambient occlusion channel as a channel mask. Depth mask is going to give you masking based on depth in the scene. So we can start to rein this in if we want. And you can see there it is. And we can adjust fall off, things of that nature. To be honest, I don't hardly ever use depth masking, but it is available for you if you need it. We've talked about backface masking, and lastly, fractal noise masking is a really interesting way to create a fractal pattern out of a mask. So if I were to come over here, we'll let MARI catch up to me. Basically, because my preview is enabled, what we should see here is a fractal pattern shows up. There it is. And I can come over here and I can adjust things like the seed, the size of the pattern. I'll just shrink it down. Maybe we want to use this to create some subtle noise in the leather texture. And we can use that basically to mask paint that we're looking at painting. So we can come in here and adjust contrast and roughness if we wanted to. And again, we've got an invert option down here at the very, very bottom. But let me come in and show you what this does. I will disable the preview and just come in here and begin to paint with that white paint. So you can see this is actually a pretty useful form of projection masking if you're just needing kind of a random noise in terms of a surface. So again, this is projection masking, and basically what we're doing is we are sliding a form of a mask between the paint buffer and the mesh itself so that we can really control how the paint is applied as it's baked.